Welcome to Panelism, a podcast where we talk about the comics and graphic novels we're reading. I'm Todd A.
Taylor Trask. Hey.
Good to talk to you again. We are on episode 98 now. We're just counting down, or counting up to 100, after which point we will continue to count up, really.
And then we will issue our manifesto to America along with...
that will come in episode 616.
And then with instructions on what to do when the when the aliens come. All of it will be revealed at episode 100. So just
so perfect. Such a perfect lead in to this crazy ass book that I'm going to talk about, which I don't even feel like we should beat around the bush too much. You know, like I kind of wanted to do a little banter at the beginning. But we did that before the last episode that we recorded, which in episode 97, you talked about before Watchmen's Ozymandias, and you've done all this beautiful research, and like you had all these, you put this like character struggle in such a great light and described everything so well. And I've just brought chaos to the proceedings. And of course we're recording these on the same day. So we're back to back. I'm just like even more, I don't know, it's even more of a struggle to try to, I guess the thing is like, I'm not, oh boy, you and I always talk offline and sometimes online maybe, or sometimes on the podcast about what we would do. Would we ever review a book that we didn't like? And
that comes up a lot, actually.
Yeah. And we haven't really done it. You know, I wouldn't say, like, I think we've been maybe slightly critical of things, but generally our outlook is there's plenty of books not to read. We just want to give you a list of stuff to read. Like this is good stuff.
Well, it's comics and graphic novels worth having on your shelf.
Exactly. Thank you. And this is this is not worth having. I guess that's where I should just say
this is a buyer beware episode. I guess
maybe not a buyer beware, but I wanted to revisit this. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me name this book.
Yeah.
This is called, it's a manga, and it is called Canon God Exaxxion Stage 1.
Now, that is the best rapper name I have ever heard. That beats XXX Tentacon, whatever that guy's name is. That like we should start a posse. And one of us can be named, and then I'll come up with a second rap name for myself. You can be Canon God Exaxxion Stage 1, and I'll be like Stage 2 or something. I don't know. We'll figure it out.
Well, that is what Volume 2 is called. The 5 volumes of this are all named in stages. It is by and I hope I'm pronouncing this name right. Unfortunately, it's by Kenichi Sonoda, and unfortunately, in my head, I have pronounced it Sonoda for like 10 years. So I don't know what's going to come out of my mouth as we record this, but it was published by Dark Horse, released in 2001 in the States by Dark Horse. It was originally released in Japan in 1998. So, keep that in mind. It's, what's that, just 20 years old though?
That was back in those dark times when like other countries would get things and we'd be like one day, and then 4 or 5 years later, that was
I've
back
heard of this great book.
Yeah. And it's like, now it's just like, same day translation. Here you go. It's like, why bother to wait?
Yeah. So that's, like I said, I would say it's not worth having on your shelf, but I wanted to revisit it in sort of the context in which I bought it. And then when I reread it, I went, oh my God, this raises so many sort of troubling, but possibly interesting things to discuss with you. And let's see, like, I just kind of took on this challenge of like, let's just see if Taylor and I can do this,
Okay. Challenge accepted.
Yeah. It's, I did not get into it in 2001, much less 1998. I probably got it around 2009 or 10. But I got into it because I had read, good God, I don't know, like 9 volumes of Kenichi Sonoda's other huge manga, for which he is much more famous, called Gunsmith Cats. And I've mentioned it a couple times here, and I just in a throwaway way of like, this is one of my favorite mangas. Gunsmith Cats, I remember someone pitching it like when Dark Horse started doing the re-releases of that. So Dark Horse re-released Gunsmith Cats in like a almost omnibus form. Like several of these volumes came out as just huge, thick, small, like manga size small, like 6x9 or less kind of paperback, but just very thick, not like a 5-issue arc, but like here's 25 issues or something.
Mhm.
So they started putting these out in where they were not flipped, which is a big deal in manga. So they had been translated into English, but you read them right to left.
Oh,
So
weird.
you
Okay.
open the back cover and then flip through it right to left. And that really, I mean, I've heard, I'm not going to pretend I'm like some, genius art scholar that understands this, but it helps you see the perspective that the artist was drawing certain things in, because you think they've literally flipped all the pages backwards. So stuff doesn't line up right.
I just remember when I was reading Death Note, which we talked about several episodes ago. But that, I was happy to see that it was, even though it was translated in English, that it still kept the true manga format. That helped. That story especially needs that. I mean, I've heard some people argue that some manga it doesn't really matter, but that particular book did absolutely need to go in the style. Just there was something about the flow and the cadence of going right to left, reading it like it was originally meant to be, that heightens it.
Right. And I can't really speak with authority on whether this, works better right or left. But I ended up, I just loved this book. They put out these big, fat volumes of it. And then they started putting out slim volumes of like a continuing story that I guess he had done maybe after the original run. And I remember it being pitched at the time, like on a comics blog I was reading, of like, this is my favorite, some other comics reader had put this up and said, oh my God, this is my favorite release this week. It's girls running a gun shop who are obsessed with muscle cars. They live in Chicago. And I was like, wow, okay. And it was sort of a crazy take on, it was just crazy that like, and obviously like Japanese manga artist and writer sort of portrayed America in this way. And it wasn't like, not in some great, political commentary or anything like that, just funny that it's like, hey, I'm going to put all these macho things together. It's going to be about these, these two girls and they run a gun shop and they love, their muscle cars and they're in Chicago. So I guess that makes it all even more muscular or sausage festy or something.
They're not in Sarasota Springs,
right?
It is Chicago. You gotta have it.
Yeah. Anyway, so I read that. I really enjoyed it. I'll get into some of the now revisiting those feelings of enjoyment after reading this. And then along the way, as I, kind of ran out of, they stopped publishing them because they ran out of stuff to publish. And I ended up finding some of the original Dark Horse trades of Gunsmith Cats, which were published in the left to right format. So I actually have a couple of volumes where I can compare left, right, right, left. Mm-hmm. And then I had heard that Sonoda had done this other like legendary series. And it was, and I guess it ran before Gunsmith. Yeah, sorry. But actually that would be good to verify if you want to Google that for me. Anyway, that was my perception, was that he had done this one before Gunsmith Cats, which was just so well received. And it was him doing a sci-fi kind of a take on mechs and, just that manga form of mechs and sci-fi and spaceships and robots and stuff like that. And so it was very hard for me to hunt down, even though this was the internet age. I hadn't yet developed that reflex of just going to Amazon and searching for anything. Or maybe I had and it just wasn't available. I eventually stumbled across 2 volumes only. So I only have stage 1 and 2, read them and kind of went, I'm not into it. It just sort of sat there on my shelf. So when I revisited it a couple weeks ago, specifically for our podcast, I went in thinking like, you know what, I'm going to like figure this out. Is this any good? Is it like, what am I missing out on here? Mm-hmm. So I I'm going to try to describe the story to you. I might as well read the back cover, which is the thing we do. But as I often point out, back cover sometimes gets me more lost. And I don't want to spoil anything, but it just sounds so freaking bonkers on the back cover. I don't think it will spoil anything.
Okay.
Here's the back cover. I'm sure this was written by like a Dark Horse marketing person, that was like, how do we talk about this? Like, it just, anyway, you'd be in shock too. Let's say you're Hoichi Kano, typical high school student. Earth has been taken over by what seems to be a kindly coexisting race of aliens. Your brilliant and depraved grandfather, whom you haven't seen in years, shows up to deliver a sexy android and an integrated, armored, nearly indestructible gun suit for your personal use. And just in time, because a ball-shaped robot with razor blade arms has just sliced through a wall like soft butter. Think that's a bit of a culture shock? Wait until you find that our alien friends aren't quite as friendly as we thought, and that this mechanical monstrosity is just the tip of the invasion iceberg.
Now, this reminds me, there's a anime series called One Punch Man.
Yes.
That this sort of, just hearing that sort of brings to mind series like just kind of these insane kind of Japanese like scenarios that just, that, are almost simple, but then just like they're so crazy that they can kind of use that simplicity of, to their benefit, but then still talk about some interesting ideas. Is this series kind of like that?
I wish.
Okay.
And you know what I've just discovered is that this actually came out after Gunsmith Cats. So that really casts it in a different light.
Gunsmith Cats, by the way, was 91 to 97. And then Canon God came out from 97 to 2004 in Japan.
And he worked on, like, obviously we've both done the Googling now. He worked on Bubblegum Crisis. So it's definitely in that style of like the alien invasion, like the big mechs and all that kind of stuff. The back cover almost makes it sound campy in an intentional way.
Okay.
And I think what I discovered, when I read Gunsmith Cats, and now that I've reread this, I want to go back and reread Gunsmith Cats and talk about it. Because I think it is going to be problematic, to use a phrase in the culture right now. The back cover makes it sound campy, and I think when I read Gunsmith Cats, I thought Gunsmith Cats was sort of meant to be campy, and I think I just sort of bought into that, like almost like enjoying Fast and Furious movies. That's sort of what I took to Gunsmith Cats. What if the leads in this were Gal Gadot and not Michelle Rodriguez, because I didn't really like her in that, but one of the others that I really liked. Who else was in Fast and Furious? Oh my God. Elsa Pataki, was she the
I have unlike you, I've barely.
Anyway,
I know we've talked about Fast and Furious as something more than I envision it, but I still haven't yet put toe in the waters of those.
So forgivable. So I think I took that to Gunsmith Cats, or at least that was, I read it as campy. And so when I reread this one for sure, and when I read Canon God the first time, I think I was pulled back from that campiness, and I went, oh wait, somehow I'm not getting the fun of Gunsmith Cats. So when I reread it, I went, oh my God, this is kind of disgusting in certain ways. And does that, do I need to now go back and read Gunsmith Cats and figure out, like, was I just a lecherous person when I read this? Or was it actually like enjoyable and kind of campy? Because it's so weird to me now, especially in this moment of learning, like, oh, this did not actually precede Gunsmith Cats. It came afterwards. And it's like, man, you already knew how to do campy. So, why?
I still feel like you're kind of dancing around the issue.
Okay.
Is it overtly sexist? Is it like, is this Japanese businessmen buying girls' panties on the,
definitely.
It is. Okay.
It's maybe not quite that bad. I don't know that there's a panty vending machine in this, but let me go back to that, like that back cover, and kind of give you the details of that. So, Hoichi Kano is this, he's a student, and he does not so in this school, in this Earth, let me back up another step. We have been invaded by this alien race called the Riofaldians, and they have given us this technology that allows us to develop our tech so much farther ahead than what we used to be. Like all of a sudden, like a cell phone, this would sort of be, I guess, present day 1998 when it was written. So all of a sudden, a cell phone from 1998 is like a smartphone phone from now. They can't believe the tech they've gotten, and it's like everywhere. It's not just phones, it's TVs, it's these floating advertising sort of UFOs that like just this drone that floats around and shows advertisements over the city.
Mhm.
Everything has this real Faldian tech in it, and the real Faldians are just totally integrated into society. So Hoichi goes to this school where one of his teachers is a real Faldian, and he will not attend her class because his grandfather is sort of like the Alex Jones of this world and has been preaching for years that the real Faldians are going to take us over. Like they're like the lizard people. Maybe I should have said David Icke. So they're like the lizard people that are like they've secreted themselves in here, and something bad's going to happen.
Okay.
But his grandfather. Oh, I'm sorry. Did I interrupt? Were you about to ask something?
No. I'm just nodding along.
The grandfather is also like unreasonably rich because he's also this technical genius. So he's a little bit of Doc Brown too.
Okay.
So he has developed all these technologies on his own, and we will learn some of them are because he was able to reverse engineer real Faldian tech. But then he's patented those things. And so the patents from this have made him this rich man. He lives on this island. So on this typical day, Hoichi is skipping class, and his friend Akane Hino, who is looks much younger than him, younger. Yeah, they're in the same class, but she looks much younger. She is always carrying a camcorder around, which of course has been enhanced with this real Faldian tech, but it looks like just a digital video camcorder.
Mhm.
And Akane is sort of harassing him, like, you should go to this class. You shouldn't be, don't listen to your grandfather. Like nobody's seen him in years. And that's when we learn that he's on this island and he doesn't talk, whatever. Meanwhile, in the class, this new student shows up named Isaka Minagata. So I, again, apologize. There are a lot of names here and nobody has like an easy, like, like nickname. There's no Supermans or anything. So Isaka, everyone thinks she's so hot. They're just really blown away. She introduces herself to this real Faldian teacher. And there's a lot of gratuitous shots of her chest, and she's dressed. There's nothing exploitative in that way, but it's definitely like I think what would be called fan service in manga.
Okay.
And the boys are all like hubba hubba, and saying all these stupid things. And she meanwhile says, isn't Hoichi Kano supposed to be in this class? And they're like, oh my gosh, Hoichi? And she's like, yeah, like we go way back. And so all the students are immediately jealous. Like, how does Hoichi know this hot girl? And before the class is even over, Isaka says, you know what? I'm feeling really ill. I go to the nurse's station. So she just leaves because Hoichi's not there. So she meets Hoichi outside and he's like, hubba hubba. Who is this girl? And Akane, we kind of learn like sort of has a thing for Hoichi. And so she's a little bit jealous and a little suspicious of this new girl that shows up.
I'm sorry. Did they actually use the words hubba hubba?
I don't think they do, but it's something just as stupid. So I definitely wanted to
another 1920s colloquialism.
Right.
Hubba hubba, what a dame! She's all right. It's just
let me read you some of the things they say. They say, "Look at them puppies."
Oh my god, it is. Look at them puppies.
9.5, maybe a perfect 10.
Oh my god.
So. Yeah,
I wonder what the original translation actually is. Like how much they had to stretch. I wonder
if he says hubba hubba in it. That would be amazing. Like in Japanese, if that's what he said. So anyway, she locates Hoichi. I don't want to go panel by panel through this. Akane's jealous, doesn't understand this relationship, and like instantly it's like Hoichi's like, I got a girlfriend. We're gonna go make out. All this is cool, but then she is explaining. Like, your grandfather's here. He wants me to give you this. And then boom, there's grandpa. He's like on the roof of the school. And like, what the hell is going on? And they give Hoichi this package. That is
Hoichi, you gotta date this girl. It's like,
oh my God. Yes. That's where the back cover comes back in. your brilliant and depraved grandfather.
Wow.
So he shows up and gives him this indestructible gun suit. So it's sort of like a flight suit, but it's got like Iron Man properties where he can get shot and it's fine. And he's wearing like a motorcycle helmet basically with the suit. And it's an Iron Man kind of thing where it's like on a glove and he just says the magic words or he taps it or something. And, you know, it comes out of the glove and it's like covers him. And the helmet comes on, it covers his face. But he keeps breaking the visor on the thing. So it's obviously not that protective because that will like spoil his identity. So whenever that happens, they're like, get out of the way. Don't let anyone see you. So just then, this happens. And Hoichi's like, well, this is crazy. Why do I need this? And this robot attacks the school. And so he's able to defend that. So what we learn pretty quickly is there is this unveiling of this giant rocket ship that the real Faldians have collaborated with the Earthlings on. And that's what all the students are watching on TV that day. And this is the big thing. You know, it's like the space shuttle launching or something like what we used to do in the 80s. All the classrooms are watching. And at the moment where, you know, everyone's waiting for this big dramatic announcement, the real Faldians announce, we're taking over Earth. And
psych,
the hull of this thing opens and it is this giant humanoid shaped robot thing. It's like a Pacific Rim kind of, mech. Okay. And its chest is a giant cannon and it fires this cannon. And I can't remember exactly where. I know where one of them goes, but I don't want to spoil anything. But it's anyway, it's devastating. And also what they do is they disable every like electronic device that has their tech in it. And so basically they have established total control of everything. And so one of these drones has appeared at the school, and that's what Hoichi is fighting in his gun suit. So here's where I don't have to keep going into the details. At one point, I guess when Hoichi's visor is damaged in one of the accidents or something, he has to go like Isaka has to, says, I can help you out. I can repair your suit. And he's like, okay, let's get this done. And she takes his hand and puts it on her enormous breast and it like disappears in her breast. I can't believe I'm describing this on a podcast. And she is like a nanotech kind of android.
Oh, okay.
And so her whole body is like a gooey transformer. And so she repairs this through the nanotech. So the nanotech also comes in because when he starts to find people who have been devastated in an attack, he can just literally lay hands on them and the nanotech from his suit will creep into their bodies and fix them. So he's like this God savior kind of thing, which doesn't have anything to do with the name of the book yet, at least that I know. Anyway, so then of course they have to fly to go do something else. And in these cutscenes where it shows the grandfather never actually visited him on the school, that was a hologram. The grandfather's still in his island base and he is surrounded by people that look just like Isaka. So it's just large chested women.
So wait, how did the grandpa know to build them off of her model? Like it's
not her. He built her. He built Isaka.
Oh, so the original time. Okay, so when Isaka first met,
that's not the tech that he has reverse engineered.
But the first time when Isaka says, "Oh, I know Hoichi," when they met before, she was an android then.
They had never met before.
Oh, okay.
She was just saying we go way back because the grandfather had like told her all that, I guess, or something. It was just a ruse. So yeah, because Hoichi's the whole time is like he thinks she's a real girl and he wants to make out with her, and she has this huge chest, and he follows her outside. So anyway, so at one point they have to fly, and if you've seen the cover of this book, there's like this sort of motorcycle pod thing, sort of like in Return of the Jedi, the things that fly through the forest, where the front of it is sort of like, it looks like a bullet. Mm-hmm. Well, or it looks like really stretchy boobs. Because the way this thing develops is that Isaka is like, we've got to fly there. There's no time. And he's like, fly there. And her breasts extend and she turns into a vehicle that he sits on. Like he literally mounts this woman that looks like a giant sort of phallic or, other sexual device and flies on her and she's like a spaceship.
This sounds like a pretty common trope, though, in Japanese.
Right. So at this point, I guess it's just that thing of like, it doesn't walk the line of being silly enough or gratuitous enough to be campy. And it keeps falling into like exploitative, you know? Okay. And that's where I'm curious about where Gunsmith Cats will land when I reread that. Mm-hmm. Is like, did I just, you know, was I just not thinking with that part of my brain at the time? Was I not seeing this like, you know, as it is, or was it legitimately campy? I don't know. Mm-hmm. This one, and because of that, it lacks all the spirit of Gunsmith Cats. Now I could be wrong. I could go back and reread Gunsmith Cats and find out it's just as trashy, but it doesn't, you know, it could have played into elements of this without just being this bad. Yeah. You know, it's like a bad B movie.
Now, how did they get 4 to 5 volumes out of this? If that's
actually 7,
okay.
I mean, but I think what you're saying is right. Is that just fits into a sort of manga trope of, you know, literally like the woman literally turns into any object you want, you know, whether that is, and it's a battle object or it's a sex object or whatever. It's just, they've literally objectified women in this, you know?
Wow.
So at this point, like in the story, we find out that the grandfather, he lets the one big missile from the Riofaldians mech destroy Mount Fuji because he tells Hoichi not to stop it because he's like, no, the people on the earth need to wake up. Mm-hmm. And, you know, it's like, damn, that's cold, Grandpa. But then he sends Hoichi out to stop the next attack, and he gets in his own mech, and he does it in this, as I recall, very phallic way where the penis shaped like jet cycle that he's on, it, you know, enters a hole in the back of this thing. But again, it's not like in a sexual location on a humanoid. It's just like in the back of it. So you're like, oh man, you're kind of there, but you're not silly enough that this
sounds like a cutaway scene from the ambiguously gay duo.
It's like if a 12-year-old was writing something like this, because it's like a 12-year-old who doesn't actually know how any sexual things work, you know, but it's like, I've heard of boobs and penises and holes and stuff, and is like fascinated with guns and spaceships, and then just puts it all together, and it's just not fun, and it's not amusing, and it's that to me is, I mean, that's all I can tell you about it at this point, because it's the story at some point just starts to fade away because of all these badly handled, like there's no part of this story that I'm like, yeah, I want to keep reading this, you know. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I like I've said a thousand times now, I just I'm so curious to go back and read Gunsmith Cats and think, you know, with this new perspective of like, was this guy being campy on purpose, or is this truly just exploitation? Mm-hmm. There is another scene I should mention, which is there's an attack on the Riofaldians by like some rebel humans, and it's significant because the Riofaldian has some, like the, you know, general or colonel or whatever, the head guy has some special ability or like some science that absorbs the bullets that they shoot or whatever, but he hasn't given it to his female assistant, who's also an alien, but she gets killed. So there's just another scene of like, yeah, here's a woman who literally jumps in front of a man who didn't even need her to try to save him because he's got this tech that stops bullets anyway.
You know, culturally speaking, it'd be great to go back and see what if this was like a trend of manga at the time. If this is like, you know, like I mentioned earlier, there is sort of this weird thing in Japanese culture where, you know, men on the Ginza will buy little girls' underwear, and it's like, why is that okay? Yeah, to quote Matt Damon in The Informant, why is that okay? As he's one of his like internal monologues, he mentions that. So it's like there's this thing, and I wonder how much of it's influenced culturally by that. If there's sort of this understanding in some kind of, you know, like, is there a version of manga that sort of comes across more as like, you know, Tijuana Bibles, you know, almost in this regard, which is sort of totally exploitative? And do they look at manga like this as like, oh, it's it's so extreme that it's almost kind of funny. It's not meant to be,
Right.
you know, it's not tone deaf. It's they just push it so far intentionally.
And
like, do you ever get the sense that that's the case?
And it's not doing that here, you know.
Okay.
And I it's another book that I thought of maybe including this, you know, in our podcast at some point was this, especially as I read this, there's this other manga that I read and I've not reread in, I don't know, a decade and a half or something, but I remember it being exploity in a way, and it was like a ninja one. There's one really famous one that I think was called Battle Royale, and I think I read the one called Battle Club. Anyway, I don't recall exactly, but Battle Club was like, you know, it's just everybody's trying to, you know, they're all fighting, but when something exploitative would happen, it would be like really obvious and they would point it out. Like there'd be this sort of meta commentary of like an arrow pointing down, and it's like, don't say we didn't give you any fan service. And so you, at that point, you knew like you're in on the Tijuana Bible kind of joke.
Got
you
it.
know?
Yeah,
I guess, and I honestly, I'm like happy to be corrected on this, you know, by women. But I think there's sort of you know, it goes back to something we talked about a couple episodes where I had heard John Waters describe showgirls as being campy because there's a type of campy where it's presented as totally serious, but because it's so bad and it takes itself so seriously that it becomes camp. But there's also a campy that's John Waters campy, which is, you know, you're, you know, making something that's trash.
Yeah.
And I think of like Russ Meyer is kind of like, he knew he was making trash, and his movies are trash and they're exploitative and they have a ton of violence against women. And I don't like, I haven't revisited them in a while, but I don't, you know, I don't think I would like them, but I don't think I would feel, I don't know. I guess I would feel like he sort of knew what he was doing, and he obviously had some bad ideas about women and sexual relations and kind of power and the dynamics, and that you could examine it through all those lenses, but he was doing it intentionally. Whereas there's sort of this USA Up All Night Network slew of movies that are exploitative, and they never quite went far enough. You know, I remember when I was working at Blockbuster, in the, you know, post Basic Instinct heyday, there were like all these B movies and exploitative, you know, movies, but they just were never as, you know, like accomplished, or either they were too serious and they just had a lot of female nudity in them, or they were kind of campy and they had no story, but they weren't campy enough. You know, it's like that line. And I just think Sonoda in Canon God, it's just not good. Like he just missed the line completely. He doesn't, you know, there's things where, like I said, there, you know, every woman is like a literal object for these men. And then there's things like where he really shows such reverence to things like guns. Like there's some weird detail where this kid can't use like a laser gun or a blaster against the robots because that would obviously have the technology in it that could be taken over. So he uses like an old school 50 millimeter handgun or something. And it's like all the, like, you know, it's like labeled down to the model and make of this gun. So it's obvious that the author knew this gun and just had this hard on for it and wanted to put it in the story. And that's all through Gunsmith Cats. But when I read that, I thought, oh, that's kind of funny. It's like his take on Americans. Like they know everything about guns and cars.
Yeah.
So to me, I read Gunsmith Cats with this totally different lens of like, he's sort of making cultural commentary. So even if he draws the women in a, you know, very objectified way, he's doing it knowingly or something. And now I'm just not so sure. So that's, I hope I haven't rambled too much about that. That's really where I wanted to stop it. And it's, you know, I'll field any questions from the audience.
Well, you covered I think you covered the story wonderfully, but like the art, you know, manga art is always really interesting to discuss. Is there anything unique or special about this particular book?
It's actually one of the things I love so much about Gunsmith Cats was it was really busy and full of action, you know, with the cars and guns, and like it was just very action motivated. And it was very, very clean while being busy. and so detailed. Like when this guy drew a car, you knew he had stared at a reference photo of this car for, hundreds of hours or something. Like every detail was in there. And this one just feels kind of like in comparison, it's just sort of like, he just sort of cranked it out. He phoned it in or something. Like I get that part of the style was.
Let me jump in. Is this sounds more and more like The Dark Knight Strikes Again to The Dark Knight Returns, meaning that everybody has all this reverence and sort of love for The Dark Knight Returns. And then The Dark Knight Strikes Again, everybody's just like, I don't know what the hell he was trying to do. Like it almost kind of seems like this, he had creator Kenichi Sonoda had like this great sort of series, and then he's like, I'll follow that up, and just nobody told him no.
Yeah.
Or there was nobody there to kind of edit him the right way. Is that a fair assessment?
I love the idea of comparing it to the works of Frank Miller, because the intended end to that trilogy, DC wouldn't give Frank the rights to Batman, so he rewrote it as Holy Terror, where Batman goes around, killing Muslims and solving terrorism. And it is awful. And Kenichi Sonoda in this, there is definitely this undercurrent of xenophobia. And it's like, oh my God, what a weird way to portray. Like there's no, at least in stage one, and as I don't even recall from stage two, but I don't remember picking up on this, on any, shades of gray when I read these stories. It's like, no, the aliens are bad, period. There's no like, wait a minute, like there's sort of a standoff with the teacher when she tries to get out of the class and the students start approaching her. And I believe one of the robots outside, the drones, like kills one of the students to defend the teacher. But it's not really explored. Like, how do we feel about this woman? She's been our friend and our mentor. And it's just, there's no subtlety, which is the same with Holy Terror, which is like Frank Miller just lost his damn mind and wrote this awful book.
Well, and Frank Miller is also known to have sort of his treatment of women characters in his book is not great, so it's just, there is interesting sort of connective tissue between the two.
But there's nothing that Sonoda does that's like outside the realm of like the manga wheelhouse. All of this looks so typically manga. So it's even in Holy Terror, Frank Miller, there's like literal boot prints and stuff in the art because he wanted to give it this textural feel, like where he's, the Batman analog in it is running around in these combat boots and Frank Miller's stepping on his paper with his combat boots to put that in the art, this has nothing like that. It's not breaking down any barriers or anything. It just looks like, he phoned in, an exploitative sci-fi manga, and that's it. So, and xenophobic, I guess that's worth mentioning. It's like you say, it'd be interesting to sort of review what was going on in Japanese culture at the time. I don't know any other manga from this period that I could relate it to and say, oh, that's, they all lined up in 1998. They just really loved breasts or something. I'm glad we're talking about this book because there are, parents who listen to the show now and then, and there's younger folks who might listen to the show and they may be wondering, well, how do I get my kid into manga? Or how do, I'm interested in going to manga. And a title like, that's sort of as fantastical and almost childish as Kenichi Exaxxion stage 1, like in your back of the cover, sort of read through, by all accounts, make this sound like an innocent, fun, youthful kind of thing. So it's good to know, appearances can be deceiving, and you may find a sort of a different meal under the cover. And the other reason it's good for me to revisit this personally is that, as comic collectors, a lot of times we become those like, you see 2 volumes on your shelf when there's 7 and you're like, I gotta be a completist. Like someday I'm going to track these down. And I think that's probably why it sprung to mind recently, was because with Christmas shopping and stuff, I've been going through my Amazon wish lists and I always had like the other volumes on a wish list waiting to see if they would ever appear, because they do appear, but it's like they're at collector prices, and I always knew like, I'm not going to pay that for this, so maybe it'll drop. But that's probably what put it in my head originally, and now I know after revisiting it, like, nope, just gonna put that one to bed. you know,
Yeah.
stop worrying about this. Go to Book Off, sell them these two for, 5 cents or whatever they'll give me, and I'm done.
Off you go. Well, that's been an interesting, it is good to once in a while touch on books that we don't just like are gushing over all the time. Like it is, I like the balance. So, yeah, I'm glad you jumped into this. Any other thoughts before we call it a day on this episode?
No, I don't. I don't want to keep talking anymore.
All right.
I appreciate you asking such great questions and coming to this crazy discussion, because when I texted you my pick the other day, your response was something like, "What the hell?"
I think I wrote, "What even is that?"
Yeah.
It's the name itself. The title is like, I can't even what, huh? Well, if you want to, if you can't get enough of us talking and you want to hear more, you can find us anywhere podcasts are downloaded: Pocket Cast, Stitcher, Google Play, not Spotify, although I think we're going to solve that in the new year. I think we're going to upgrade our plan to be on Spotify. So if you need to be on Spotify, we'll be there soon too. But anywhere else you find podcasts is where we are. Search for Panelism and tell your friends. You can also find us on Instagram. We are panelism.inc. That's INK. And that's actually our URL as well. Panelism.inc. You'll find all our past episodes as well as other goodies. And again, just subscribe, share, let us know what you think. If you're on Instagram and you're listening, recommend books for us to read. We always like that. There's actually, I'll throw this out there, 2 things. One person on Instagram, I'd posted up, speaking of The Dark Knight, I'd posted up the Dark Knight Returns Noir panel or 2, just kind of mentioning how I prefer that format. And a helpful fan mentioned that The Dark Knight Strikes Again in Noir is actually, and then digitally too. So like a smaller scale black and white actually makes that book way more tolerable. Ooh. So I'm going to dive in. I'm going to be gone next week for Christmas. I'm going to dive in. I grabbed a copy on Amazon for like $7, and I'm going to see if he's right. Curious. And I'll report back. I might even do that as my New Year pick. And then also there's another fan on Instagram who shared some of their own art. They're doing their own comic series and mentioned it. So looking into that as well. So if you've got comics you're creating, we'd love to check them out. Maybe we'll review them on the show. At the very least, we can give them a shout out. And keep listening. And I'll see you, Todd, on the next episode. And I'll see you guys as well.
All right. I will see you there, or I will see you on another time.